And kicking off this UFC Fight Night, we have Charles Johnson at 13-5 taking on Rafael Estevam, who has an unbeaten record at 11-0, but is on his UFC debut. So Estevam won on Contender Series in 2022, but ended up having 2 canceled bouts since. He fought in the Brazilian promotion Shudo for most of his career, and then he ended up getting 1 fight in the LFA before heading over to Contender Series. He also has jiu-jitsu tattooed across his chest, so keep that in mind when you're betting on this man. But in his Dana White Contender Series fight, some of my quick notes on that, he got himself into some dangerous positions pretty quickly in that first round, but it was clear that his opponent, Elias, was just shooting for the submission, shooting for finishes the whole time, trying to make it flashy. And when you go for submission over position, it always tends to fail. So he got a little reckless with it, and that's when Estevam ended up taking over, where he started dominating him the rest of the way out in that first round, and his opponent gassed out, and he was able to take advantage of him with the ground and pound. Now, I don't see that happening at all in this fight because Charles Johnson, the name of his game is the cardio. He is the king of cardio at such a low weight class, which is awesome to see. So he's also not a one-trick pony like Estevam's first opponent, where Charles Johnson has a Muay Thai background. He's great at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, overall sound on the feet, and he's got some creative striking as well on the feet. So for me, the story here is he's been a very active fighter in 2023. He fought 3 fights in 4 months in the UFC, which is pretty remarkable. And then he took some time off. Well, time off by his standard, like a normal fighter's time off from April until November now, giving him his 4th fight in 2023. First fight of his career in the UFC was Muhammad Makayev. He still looks solid in that one, I thought. He's beaten Zumagulov as well as Jimmy Flick. My thoughts on both of them are known. Love my boy Zumagulov. May he find success in another promotion. And Jimmy Flick, I think, is a bum. But he stepped in to fight Odi Osborne on short notice in February, right after that January win. Lost by split decision. And then he fought Durden in April in a bout that he lost by decision. My notes on that Durden fight, Durden really jumped on his back from the get-go. And he just had him like a backpack the entire time. And Charles still persevered through, where he maintained the cardio all 15 minutes, which is really good. And that's a good sign heading into this fight. It's just like he was waiting for these times to break free from Durden, where he needed to actually get loose. He'd put some combos together, and then it felt like Durden would be right back on him again. Once you saw Durden start to gas in that 3rd round a little bit, that was when Charles started to shine, where he was able to kind of do some stuff for 3 minutes in the 3rd round, and then in the final 2 minutes, Durden went back on his bullshit. Which, hey, not bullshit. It's a good strategy, and Durden is a good fighter. But I really love Charles' cardio, his experience, and the mixed bag of looks that he's going to be able to give this UFC newcomer here. I think Estevam, he also botched his weight cut when scheduled to fight Zumagulov in May. So he could see some similar struggles here at 125 pounds. It's a tough weight cut. And Charles has always been a professional when making weight. Size matchup is relatively the same, which doesn't really play into Charles' favor because he's typically a bigger guy for this weight class. That was a long-winded preview by me, but I think it's pretty clear here that I'm going with Charles. Rick, who do you have in this fight?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting fight because you've got a guy making his UFC debut, like we talked about, versus a former LFA champion he is well established as far as MMA goes on a global scale at this point. While he's got 5 UFC fights and is just 2 and 3, he's seen success against top-tier opponents across different promotions. So an interesting, huge step up in competition for Estevam against a reeling Charles Johnson that, in my opinion, has struggled against specialists throughout his UFC career and his tenure, and has gone to a lot of close decisions as a product of that. I mean, he's in his 5 UFC fights, he's gone to 4 decisions, 2 of which being split decisions. And since that debut fight against Muhammad Makayev, where he lost, he's been a favorite every single fight since, despite all of those, or a lot of those, being on short notice, as you mentioned. So it's an interesting fight, given that he's not really dominant anywhere, but he's good everywhere and has that incredible cardio. He tends to get in those super tight exchanges and super tight fights to score because he can scramble off his back really well. He can wrestle pretty decently. He's a creative striker, as you mentioned. But especially this weight class, power, it just isn't really there as much anymore for huge knockouts. And Estevam could cause some different challenges. But really, I mean, his takedowns and where I see this fight finishing, if it does finish, is on the ground by submission. but I don't think that Estevan's going to have the success to be able to get it to the ground. I think that this fight likely goes to decision, but if it does get finished, I think it's because of a quick scramble by either fighter to be able to cinch up a submission that you just can't get out of, where you're just under the chin or whatever it may be, and you're done. You have to tap. That's a long-winded way of saying that I'm going to ever so slightly lean Johnson and pick Johnson in this fight, but I'm not taking either fighter. I'm staying away.
Fair enough. I feel super passionately about Johnson, and I think the reservations that you have are definitely fair. I just feel like the guys that he's lost to have been a tough draw for him, where he hasn't really lost any slouches, I would say, in this division. And coming up against Estevam here, I feel like he's got a pretty good matchup against a UFC, a guy on his UFC debut. So I found Charles Johnson money line at plus 115 on BetMGM and Caesars. It's pretty close to that on most books right now. I'll be locking that in for 1 unit. So go ahead and keep it locked in with us. And Rick, who will you be previewing next?
Next, we've got up Jonathan Pierce taking on Joe Anderson Brito in another fantastic affair on this prelim card. We'll see you there.